This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Let's go back overseas. Australia, down under. Morning for me, evening for him. That's the way these things work. Pavel Pfitzner, Young Voices contributor down in Australia. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Great to be on with you, Andrew.
I appreciate your time, sir. Okay, so we scheduled this because we were going to talk about Russia and Ukraine, and then while we were waiting, things that we were kind of waiting on sort of kicked off. So I'll just give you the floor. Where do you want to start with it? We had Vladimir Putin's speech yesterday. He is going to recognize the two regions of Ukraine. This is annexation. This is sort of the Georgian Crimean model that we have seen before. How do you want to start with this one?
I guess it is. It's really interesting to see how quickly the situation can change. Again, I wrote an article about 22 days ago, or earlier this month, and the situation's completely changed. We've got reports that there's now troops in eastern Ukraine in the breakaway regions of the Donetsk and Luhansk. And I think Putin is now making his move. He's got the stage set. He's getting those provocation, the fake provocations for war. And I think now he's ready to go if he wants to invade properly.
Yeah, he's using the guise of peacekeepers. We've seen this, this is a very old tactic. This is nothing new. We know the history here. We know that Ukraine was part of not only the old Soviet Union, but the old Russian Empire. I know I get into the trap. I think Soviet Union, really what Putin's after is the old Soviet Empire that even predates that, something the czars would recognize. This is a lot of back history, even though this is moving pieces that are more recent. How much of the history do you think plays into this? Because I know, especially in America, we tend to have short views on things because we're a young country. Australia is a young country in a lot of ways, but y'all are on the other side of the world. What's the perspective of the history part of this? Because I don't think we discussed this enough, and I think it skews our viewpoint on this.
Yeah, look, I think the history is a really, really important part of why this is all happening. Look, there's obviously the NATO issue and Russia wanting to push its sphere of influence out, but you got to recognize that Ukraine and Kiev particularly is really a founding territory for Russia. They had the Kievan Rus in the 900s. That was the first real unified Russia. Before that, it was a bunch of principalities. And so there's always been a very, very strong tie between Kiev and the Ukrainian region with the rest of Western Russia. And there's obviously deep cultural and ethnic connection there. And a lot of Russians know their history, and they know that, that is where Russia was born, through the multiple principalities merging with Ukraine and the Western Russian principalities. So I think there is obviously a lot of patriotism for the Russian people, and they would like to see their history renew itself. But again, there are also geopolitical reasons behind Putin's actions.
Yeah, we'll get back to that patriotism in a minute, because I think we think Putin's talking to us, and I don't think he is. I think everything he's doing is talking internally right now. What's the impression on your side of the world, though? Because we kind of get European centered and focused. But some of our other Aussie friends were pointing out to me that for folks on your side of the world, you kind of look at this a little differently because, of course, Australia has the famous Quad. You're thinking, well, this could involve India, this can involve China, this could get really ugly. Secondarily, for your side of the world, talk about that viewpoint of it, because that's something we're not hearing here because we're so focused on the European part of it. This does reorder, NATO and the Western order. This has a lot of potential to mess up a lot of the things like India, like Pakistan, like a lot of other moving parts that maybe affect your side of the world a little bit more.
Yeah. I don't necessarily think, this is going to be World War III with, us versus China and, Ukrainians. Well, the Ukrainians obviously will be fighting the Russians, but, the Americans getting involved against Russia. But if I were to play that side of the argument, it is a great opportunity for Xi Jinping and the Taiwan situation. So they are. It's a very analogous situation between Eastern Ukraine or Ukraine and Russia, as with Taiwan and mainland China. And I think the Western leaders and the way the UN and democracy works in the West is rather slow and not really good at responding to immediate threats. And if the entire world is focused on what's happening right now in Ukraine, I think it will not only set a precedent for Xi Jinping and China to potentially, cause some issues with Taiwan, look at, provoking them, trying to start an invasion perhaps. And if they can move fast enough, if the West was totally distracted on Ukraine, and they could pull something off very fast, both countries might have got what they want without this blowing up into World War III.
Yeah, talking to Pavel Pfitzner. Here's the thing. I think you make the excellent point here is that when you have kind of the two, let's just call them the largest bad actors on the stage in Russia and China, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, the perception, apparently accurate, is that the West is weak. The rest of the world is fractured. They are not united. Even in their response to this, it's been kind of scattershot because you have Emmanuel Macron kind of doing his own thing, trying to play peacemaker. Joe Biden's doing everything by phone calls. Boris Johnson's got problems at home, so he's not exactly been consistent in what he says. Is the sense of the world that there's just not a lot to stop these large powers that are dictatorial powers because the rest of the world just cannot get their stuff together to have a united front about it?
I think that's a fairly accurate assumption. I think the West likes to pretend that it is united, but we've got a whole lot of issues, not only internally within our own countries, but also amongst ourselves. There's a lot of conflict within the EU, post-Brexit. Other more Eastern European countries within the EU are looking at moving out of it. And, you can fake a united front against Russia, but when it comes down to it, is everyone really ready to act? Is everyone really ready to stand up and fight against Russia? And that's where I have my doubts.
Pavel Pfitzner joining us. When you wrote about it, you talked about that weakness you expressed, and this is of course, the situation has changed in the 3 weeks since you wrote about this, but still the point remains. You talked about the domestic weakness of these countries coming off the COVID stuff, coming off political fractured stuff that, an actual military campaign probably isn't in the cards for anybody in the West right now. At the same time, though, what should we be doing? I know people talk about sanctions, but they can't even seem to get on the same page as to what exactly the sanctions would be. We've already had the mess with President Biden basically handing back Nord Stream 2, so that would have been a big chip that's kind of already been taken off the board. What exactly can they do sanction-wise, since we all kind of agree that there's not going to be a military solution here other than maybe arming the Ukrainians more than they are?
Yeah. Well, in terms of sanctions, I don't think they're going to be rather that effective against Russia either. Russia's dealt with sanctions before. They know what to expect, and they have quite a self-reliant economy. They can produce enough food and machinery and all the things that most countries have to import themselves. Yeah, they've obviously got a lot of natural resources, gas, oil. And here's the problem. At the moment, the European Union is quite dependent on Russian gas. And over the last couple of months, gas prices have shot up in Europe, especially for the past winter. And if Russia decides to turn off the tap, turn off the gas to Europe, there could be really big problems for Europe and their standard of living. There'll be gas shortages, people go cold. So yes, the West can put sanctions on Russia, but Russia can cause a lot of harm to Europe as well.
Yeah, they're in a rock and a hard place. Talking to Pavel Pfitzner. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go back into Russia. We're going to talk about Vladimir Putin. We're going to talk about the patriotism angle that he's playing up here. We're going to talk about those economic conditions we talked about, like the gas prices going up. It's not accidental that the gas prices are high when he makes this move. Talking about all that with our friend Pavel Pfitzner over in Australia on Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. We're talking to Pavel Pfitzner over in Australia, Young Voices contributor. You mentioned it earlier. Let's go back and dive into it a little bit. You talked about this is a very patriotic thing in Russia. We understand that when you have a dictator type leader like Vladimir Putin, there's a lot of patriotism involved, a lot of nationalism involved. I think most Western media is misreading a lot of what he's doing, because I don't think he's really taking into account things like the Munich conference. I don't think he's listening to the Western leaders at all. Almost everything he said publicly in media in the last few weeks, it seems like it's all directed solely at the Russian people themselves and his own leaders. We had the song and dance of him and the cabinet officials in the great rotunda looking room where they're all spread out. Basically, they were all standing up, pledging loyalty, for lack of a better way of explaining it. This whole PR campaign, for lack of a better term, this has all been internal, really, hasn't it?
Well, it's definitely an internal part of it. Of course, Russia does want to expand their borders and preserve their sphere of influence. But yeah, look, Putin does want to ensure that he is, re-elected over and over again. Now, traditionally, he has always had a very high approval rating. In recent years, there's been more protests, more dissent against the government. And I think if he did pull this off, a lot of prestige would be given to him and a lot more support from the Russian people. My feeling is the Russian people are pretty ambivalent about what exactly is happening. They'll support really whatever the government wants to do. There's not much active backlash against what he's doing at the moment, which tells me if they do pull it off and they do succeed, his approval rating will probably go up within Russia.
What would ding it? A prolonged conflict, a bloody conflict. If there was, if they did figure out some kind of combination of them getting bogged down in these regions, because look, this is a massive amount of military hardware in the field right now. It takes a lot of money and resources to sustain that. The Russian military logistics is not their strong suit. We know from history. Either economic sanctions or just the weight of the maneuvers of it. If this goes for a while, is that something that could really change the calculation for him at home?
Yeah, absolutely. If this drags out and, they get, dug into trenches and it's fighting for years and years, there's going to be a lot of problems. And it'd be the same if the US intervened and it got dragged out. The US would have the same problems. Now, from what I understand, Russia is not expecting conscripts to fight. Russia does have conscription, but they're not deploying conscript battalions to the front. They're not expecting them to fight. They don't want conscripts to die in this conflict. They've got only professional soldiers really ready to invade. So if they can pull off a short, sharp war, which is possible if Belarus, let them invade from their territory. Kiev's not very far from the Belarusian border. You could pull off a quick war. But I don't think Russia would invade if they expected the war to be dragged out. They don't want that, and it's not going to give them any bonus.
Yeah, you mentioned Belarus. How big was the West not doing more against the Lukashenko election when he clearly stole the election? There was an uprising. It looked like there was a moment where they could have what happened in Ukraine, where, the non-Putin puppet got beaten in an election and President Zelensky came in, and we are where we are now in no small part of that. In retrospect, that election in Belarus a few years ago was a really, really big deal because now they are basically a wholly owned subsidiary of Russia. And a lot of geopolitics, you can just look at the map. If you're going to drive into Ukraine, Belarus is to their north and it's real close to Kiev. I don't think they're going to go into Kiev. I think they're going to stay in these regions because that would be the Ukrainians would fight them tooth and nail. You'd have women and children fighting then. I don't think they're going to do that. But when you look at the map, how big was that Belarus election in retrospect? And that was one of those points is like, if the West was going to prevent this, that was one of the spots they probably should have done something. Yeah. Well,
Belarus, I think since about 20 years ago, has had an agreement with Russia that at some point they are going to, reunify or make a joint parliament and become the same country or have some form of union. Now, it's not really happened just yet, but we do know that they are essentially Russia's puppet. Now, if the West did interfere in their election and tried to change the results, I think it'd be a huge provocation against Russia. And I think that's why the US or the West didn't do it, because Russia sees that as their own backyard. And again, if Westerners are getting involved in Belarus, I think Russia would start stepping in there as well to make sure that what they don't want to happen doesn't happen. So I'd see quite a similar thing to the Ukraine conflict.
In that same vein, I don't think the West, especially America, especially the American president, I don't think this talk of moving Zelensky out of Ukraine or at least out of Kiev, I think that is extremely not helpful dialogue and rhetoric. I know Zelensky has publicly now told the Western leadership a couple of times of like, hey, quit talking about a constant invasion, quit talking about us abandoning the capital. I don't know that the West fully appreciates the way they're going about this publicly. I don't think they're really helping a whole lot with their rhetoric here. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the mainstream media has been doing has been really damaging for Ukraine and the situation as a whole. That when I wrote my article, things hadn't escalated so much. Yes, Russia had troops on the border, but they've done this from time to time. They've done stunts like that. But the media wanted to make it seem as, yes, invasion is imminent. We're going to predict the date. It's 100% going to happen. It's going to be World War III. And none of this was coming from Ukrainian media. Ukrainians weren't trying to, say this is World War III. The Ukrainians are trying to be calm about it. Again, the Russians weren't trying to make it seem like it was going to be World War III because they're trying to downplay their own actions. But I think, I think the West thought that if their media goes and demonizes Russia and says that they're going to start World War III, that would, for some reason, prevent Putin from pursuing the war. They think that their smears would really change his decision making. But I think as Putin has waited it out and he hasn't invaded imminently, like the articles predicted, a month ago, and he didn't invade on the US intelligence's predicted date, I think it's made the West look quite like a fool. And I think it's only played in Putin's favor.
Yeah, Pavel Pfitzner joining us. You mentioned it this way, so it brings up the larger point to loop this back a little bit. Foreign policy is a process of consistency and cohesion. The actor in this story that has had the most consistency and cohesion, even though it's wrong and it's invades Ukraine, has been Vladimir Putin. Is it just that simple that he's had a plan and stuck to it and nobody else seems to have one?
Well, I think Russia knew what they wanted to do from the start. And I think they know if they're going to invade or if they're not going to. And they've known that a month ago, 2 months ago. I think the West didn't predict Russia to act in the way they are. They didn't think Russia would play it out. They thought they would respond to the Western, diplomatic responses and threats. the haphazardness of the West in their response to it really not helped them at all. So I think Russia definitely, they've got all the secrets. And it is half intelligence. This war is half intelligence. If Russia knows what they're going to do and no one else knows what they're going to do, they're going to be, 5 steps ahead. And so long as they maintain the surprise and the deceit and all their little tricky tactics that they play on the intelligence, the international intelligence stage, I think they'll come out better off.
Yeah. If they do what it looks like they're going to do now, what Vladimir Putin is hinting at, they're going to go under the auspices of independence. We're all adults here. We understand independence means they're going to go and annex them next. That's the next step after that. The invasion will be under the guise of peacekeeping forces. So other than the Ukrainians being able to beat them back, I don't know that there's going to be a strong Western response if it is this limited of an incursion. It's still wrong. It's still a sovereign nation being invaded. But the way they've gone about it and with the way the West is set up, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of strong response here. I think there's going to be a lot of word response, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of actual response. Is that your read on it?
Yeah. So at the moment, they're essentially already marching into land that they proxy control already. So the 2 breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, have been independent de facto since 2014. Ukrainians haven't really had any control over these regions since they broke away when the war started. So if Russia is walking into territory which Ukrainians don't control, there's really nothing that can be done unless the Ukrainians want to provoke something and invade these 2 breakaway republics. And I don't think that's a wise decision. I don't think the West would support such a decision. I think Putin may want that to happen because it would give him justification to push further if he wanted to go further. But if they are only going into the 2 breakaway republics, there's absolutely no chance that the West is going to do anything more than condemn him because they're already broken away, and it's not changing much by putting troops there.
Yeah. Pavel Pfitzner, really appreciate your time today on Heard Tell, Young Voices contributor, one of our Aussie friends down there. If you're like me on Twitter over Weird Hours, it's always great talking to our Aussie friends because they're up when we're up at weird times. And he's on the Young Voices page. You can follow him there. We're looking forward to seeing more from him in the future. Pavel Pfitzner, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, sir.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You need reliable appliances to help you conquer the day. And Menards is the one-stop shop for huge savings on new energy-efficient appliances. We carry the largest in-stock selection, starting at low prices and ready to take home today. Check out our top appliance brands including KitchenAid, Maytag, Whirlpool, Amana, and Criterion. Upgrade today and save big money on new appliances right now at Menards.
Save